more with MSU Extension, and I'm the family consumer science person. So I get to do some of my favorite things, and eating is one, but you don't get paid to eat, so I, I do cook a lot. And I had a catering business for a long time, so that kind of helped with that experience to do the things I do now. So hopefully you will learn something as well and just feel comfortable. I want you to ask me questions, make comments, whatever. If you have a tip that would help me out and make me do things a little bit more intentionally, please let me know. So this is kind of where we are all at now. Happy New Year, right? A new year. So a new year means different things to many people. A lot of people will make New Year's resolutions. So usually those don't last too long, from my experience, especially if they're made up of something about food. So I am just going to read a few little kitchen resolutions. I did find this. I thought it was interesting. And then it would be great if you would share maybe one of your resolutions. That would help all of us. So you should maybe get better about sharpening your knives. Does anybody know how to sharpen their own knives? You do? Okay, great. Maybe we could have a class on that someday. Yeah, that is a really good skill to have. But there are people who will do it for you too. But it's really important because anybody who loves to cook, if you don't have a sharp knife, it's pretty frustrating, isn't it? Yeah, so you have to be careful. I can't tell you probably how many nails I did cut off when I was doing catering, so hopefully those did not go into the food. That would be terrible. But anyway, yeah, you do have to be very careful. So maybe every month, say you're going to try a new spice blend. We have great places here in Missoula to be able to buy spices in bulk. So if you're a little uncertain about whether you're going to like one or not, I wouldn't buy a big container. Just go and take a little bit of something. Do some research and see what you can use that spice in. We did have a spice class a few months ago, so that was fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Maybe take 5 minutes to organize your spice rack. So when I open mine, everything falls out. So I did mark that one. I'm going to do that. Make your own salad dressing. That's pretty easy to do as well. So we probably will have something down the road on that. Think about what you're tossing into the garbage. That's kind of a big one. I always think about recycling. One of my resolutions this year was to use less of this. But it doesn't look like that's working out so far because there's not a whole lot on that roll, is there? So, you know, just be aware of all the things that we throw away. One of them has to do with squash. It says something about when you're peeling the squash, peel it a little thicker because it has a better flavor. So we're going to see if that one's true. Every week, choose a new recipe. And if you don't have a cookbook, lots of cookbooks here. Great, great selection. Try some different salts, different varieties of salts. I was involved in a class where we talked about salts at one time, and it was really interesting just to see the different flavors, so, and what they can do with your food. Let's see. Learn a way to cook steak in a different way, whether it's on the grill or to sear it in a hot pan. That's always an interesting thing to take up. Get into the habit of cleaning your coffee pot. Because we probably all need to do that, don't we? And our water bottles too, our water containers. Clean those. Learn how to clean your dishwasher and how to load it properly. Learn how to peel 15 garlic cloves in 15 seconds. That's possible. We're not going to do that tonight, but yeah, I'll work on that. Think about composting, the importance of that. And get better at saving leftovers and save money in the process. And cooking with leftovers. That's surprising what you can come up with. Make some things up. Okay, so we are going going to ask you maybe what your resolution is. Maybe it's food related, maybe not. Anybody want to share one? Any of those sound interesting? Okay, John.
My girlfriend and I are trying to meal prep more, and as a part of that, I thought I'll come here and learn a recipe. We can hopefully meal prep a bit because we eat out a lot. So
Excellent.
One of our New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, very good. Yes.
Mine is to participate in more classes like this. And as a matter of fact, I was at the Drum Brothers earlier today, and when I looked at the library thing that was going on, what was going on, it's like, oh, I got to be here again tonight. So that's my resolution. Is to,
Thank you for making that effort.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Yes.
Well, you were talking about sharpening knives, so here's the mind jingle. A sharp knife cuts true, and a dull knife cuts you.
Wow, that's a good way to remember that. Yeah.
So I sharpen my knives
Yeah.
just before I do,
Yeah.
cutting.
It's a good habit.
Every
do,
time.
too, for sure. Yeah. Thanks. Anybody else?
What's the basics of sharpening knives? Or what is the tool that you use?
Well, that's a whole different class. But that's a good.
Earlier about that I can do a class at my apartment complex because we have a common kitchen just like this.
Do it here.
Well, I've got that other place. It's just,
drink coffee.
No.
just the idea.
Do you have a teacup, any kind of teacup or anything? Basically, what I learned from my dad was he would take the coffee cup or teacup, turn it upside down, and sharpen his knife on that rough side of the bottom side. And
Yeah.
that's how
There you go.
just do it
That's
that
an
way.
idea.
Isn't there something about you have to go a certain way to
Well, you want to.
Sure, it does take a little practice. I mean, you can watch YouTube, or you can, there are classes offered, or take it to somebody and watch them do it. Yeah, it's a real. I don't know that I trust myself to sharpen my own. I like to take it to somebody else. So that's a good thing. But okay, a lot of our New Year's resolutions probably have to do with exercise or eating differently. I know why we tend to wait. I think it's because probably holidays you tend to overindulge. I do. I have all my favorite things, and then I think, okay, got to get back to eating healthier. So that's why I chose this recipe for tonight, because there are so many different versions of this. Tonight we're going to do a little healthier version. This is a vegetarian version. There's no dairy in this, so I'm curious to see what you'll think of it, but it has a lot of flavor, right? So a lot of people fail at their resolutions because there's nobody to be accountable to, nobody tracks anything, and a lack of planning and shopping. So when you said meal prep, that probably does take a lot of planning. You have to have an idea, you go get the stuff, and so that's a good idea to do that. So my goal today is to show you how to make a healthy, quick soup that tastes great. And again, most of you have picked up that copy of that recipe. If you go look online for a squash soup, you're going to come up with 100 different ones. So I encourage you to try a couple of different ones. Everybody loves squash soup at a certain restaurant out on Reserve Street. I won't mention the name. But that has a lot of different ingredients and not necessarily some that you would just have at your house. So.
What's the best squash to use?
Well, we are using butternut squash, and so that is this recipe. You could possibly use some acorn squash, but it's just a little different consistency, and it's just a matter of how much squash you get out of the vegetable itself, which you get a lot in one of these. Okay, so and squash is so good for you. It's a dark orange vegetable, so it has a lot of antioxidants. Typically, it's pretty reasonably priced. I like to get them kind of when they're in season, but they are available all year round. Before somebody's asked me about, do I always use organic ingredients? I try to, just because I feel like they taste better. and sometimes they're a little more expensive, but, so this is one vegetable that I always try to buy organic. I think it has a much better flavor. Or you can grow it. That's another nice thing too, if you grow your own. These were pretty much developed back in 1941. We always talk about the food history, which is interesting to me. So I thought, well, they've probably been around a little bit longer than that, but somebody kind of did some cross-pollination and it ended up with the butternut squash because they got tired of eating pumpkins. That was what was in the history books anyway. Another ingredient we're going to use, or several we have here, but I like to use fresh herbs. Doesn't mean you can't use the dry herbs. Anybody's guess, which one do you think is a little more potent and has more flavor when you're using it in cooking? Would it be the fresh or the dried? Yeah, the fresh does have a lot of flavor. I like that. The dried, actually you use a little bit less of the dried than you do fresh because it's a little more intense flavor. And when you put the dry in something you're cooking, it releases those oils, so it does have a stronger flavor. So use a little bit less. In fact, it's like 1 tablespoon of fresh to 1 teaspoon of dried, so that's quite a bit of difference there. Again, you can grow your own herbs. If you have them, I suggest you use those. Okay, that was what I want to say about that. We also are going to use some ginger, which has a lot of good healthy properties. Garlic and onion and a little bit of vegetable broth, and that's pretty much it. I'm going to use some olive oil, a healthy oil. You could use something else too as well. We say this does not have any animal products, so butter, which I tend to love. I'm not going to use butter this time. So I'll see if you really like the flavor. And Mediterranean cooking, which is kind of the biggest trend and the healthiest way to eat. You can read more about that. It uses a lot of olive oil. And we do have a few pumpkin seeds to garnish with. So those are the basic things that we have. And we'll get started making some so you can have a taste. I'm going to use 2 of my favorite pieces of equipment. This induction burner because it's easy for me to carry around. I use it a lot. You have to use a special kind of pan with a magnetic bottom or use cast iron. And I'll say 3 pieces of equipment. I use these cast iron dishes a lot. They're kind of heavy to carry around, but they work. They retain the heat and they work very well to cook things evenly. And then an immersion blender. Although this recipe will call for putting it in your food processor, which we do have one now, but I'm not going to use that because I really did like the results with just the immersion blender. It makes it still a little chunky, but you can do whatever you want when you make it yourselves. Okay, so let's see if we can see everything here. So the first thing we're going to look at, which takes the longest, is the butternut squash. And I decided not to cut it, all of it, in front of you because it's just going to take too long. So I did cut the other one earlier, and that's going to come in handy. But somebody was asking how to start. This is how I usually do it. I'm not sure if that's the correct way to always do it. If you can cut down the top, or if that seems to be a little hard to get into, I just cut that part off. So you can see how dark orange there is in there. If you cut one, it is a very pale looking orange. I don't know that I would use it for this soup because I don't think it's going to have as good of a flavor. So then I'm just going to take and cut down the center where you need a very sharp knife for that. And the butternut squash is important, as a lot of squashes are, in indigenous people's diet. There's a lot of great recipes, and they oftentimes would cut them and scrape out the seeds and use this as a drinking vessel. So it's just kind of a nice little scoop and drink out of it. So that's what this looks like. You've got a lot of seeds. I'm just going to scrape out those seeds. And then I start to peel a little bit. So kind of a little bit like what you do with the pumpkin, and you could save the seeds to replant, but I don't know that they taste as quite the same as pumpkin seeds. Okay.
So you were saying if you cut the skin thicker?
Yeah, a little bit thicker, and I'll show you what I mean by that, which is kind of what I did. Can you see how, I mean, if you use a regular peeler, which takes a really lots of muscle to do that, and it's got to be very sharp. It doesn't work very well. So if you use a knife, then you get a little bit better result, and you do have a sweeter flavor, because anything right up against that peeling will not have as good of a flavor. So, okay, scoop that out, and we'll just show you a little bit how you can start to peel that, and then we'll get our squash cooking. So usually I just take a pretty sharp knife, and you can do it, just follow the curve around, or you can just, cut half of it and then cut the upper half. So, in the bottom, again, don't even try without a sharp enough knife. I found a smaller knife, a paring knife works better. So just a matter of going around all of that and cutting all of it. But it does take some time. So we're gonna save that for another recipe. All right. Get this out of the way here. All right. So I've cut all of these, and this one was a little bit smaller squash, but I cut it in just about the same size, little cubes, and that way it's going to cook evenly. So I'm going to get this going here. Put this in. Yeah, anytime if you want to come up and look at something a little closer, whatever, you're welcome to do that. It helps if I put this in the right hole, doesn't it? Here we go. That's true, you do have the mirror. I keep forgetting that mirror is up there. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a couple of tablespoons of olive oil. Thing about the cast iron, it takes a little bit of time to get really heated up. Okay. A couple of our other ingredients we're going to use. There's ginger in this recipe, and I like to use fresh ginger again, but you certainly can use the dry. So I think the recipe calls for a teaspoon of grated ginger. So you would have to use a little bit more of the dry. And I'm going to ginger is kind of interesting shape always. So what I usually do is just take off a portion and then take the peeling off, and then I can start grating. And then we have an onion, some garlic, and then our herbs. Salt and pepper, that's about it. So vegetable broth. If you don't have vegetable broth, and chicken broth would be fine to use as well. But if you wanted to keep it as a vegetarian version, you use that. So I'm just going to dump all of this in here. All right, and pretty much medium heat with the lid off. Get that going. I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper there. So you could even cook the squash and just refrigerate it and use it at another time. You're going to make your soup later if you didn't want to do it at the same time. All right. So let's see, I'm going to just grate that ginger into a bowl, so that'll be ready. I'm going to use this for grating, but you can use another kind of grater. So yes, it's always a great smell to grate this. So, and then of course the ginger's gonna be here, so we're just gonna push it off of there. Ginger also has a lot of good health properties to it. All right. 2 teaspoons, I believe, or 1 teaspoon. Okay, that should be about it. Okay, ginger's pretty much available any time of the year. All right. Now we're going to 3 cloves of garlic, I believe. Yep, chopped. So when you buy a whole bag of garlic, which is usually available at Costco, and you think, wow, I'm going to use a lot of garlic, but if you don't use it up in a certain amount of time, it starts to kind of get dry. So this garlic was one I uncovered. Don't use that has no flavor. So you want to make sure that they look pretty much, now even this one is starting to get a little bit brown. You can still use that if you cut that part off. But like I say, you might think, wow, that's a good price to get all that ginger. But if you're not going to use it, there's not a whole lot of point. Yeah, so you just end up kind of wasting it. So, okay. So I'm going to chop 3 cloves of garlic here. And if I think, or 1 very large garlic, that could be 1 piece. So, nope, that looks like 2. Okay, so I'm just going to take the skin off of that. If anybody has never smashed a garlic clove and you'd like to do that, you can step right up. I think it's very satisfying. All right. And of course, garlic, the way you cut it, actually has a different flavor. So you want to really, whatever the recipe says, to cut that very specifically. If you slice it, it has a little bit milder flavor. But if you're chopping it up like this, you're going to get a little more garlic flavor. Roasting garlic is another great way to cook garlic. It's very sweet when you do that. And because garlic burns easily, I'm not going to throw it in there quite yet. Oh. When you're cooking this, it looks like the pan's getting a little dry. Then sometimes I just add a little bit more olive oil, a little bit at a time. And you're just trying to get this to where it's pretty soft so we can use the blender in there. I'm going to just throw this in with my ginger. I'm sorry, what was that?
The garlic press, you were talking about just chopping it?
You know, the garlic press will work great too. It certainly makes it a little more juicy, like, you know, it kind of smashes it. So that would be fine too, yeah. Then you definitely wouldn't need to add that till close to the end, yeah, because it would burn very easily. Okay, then we've got an onion. And let's see, we need about 1 large yellow onion. So I'm just going to cut it in half like that. And then what I usually do is take a few cuts down the middle. And then I'll take the knife and just kind of cut through it from this side. You can do that easily because the onion is still held together by this. So, then I'm going to make about 3 cuts. There we go. And then we can just, easier to chop it in smaller pieces that way. Or, again, the food processor will cut them up nicely. I kind of like to use a little sweeter onion on this, so I'm not crying right now. A scallion would work well too. It's a little bit milder flavor onion. I'm going to do the same with this one. Okay, that's that. Anybody have any questions, comments so far? Can you smell it? Okay, good.
Smell it.
Yeah, good. Smell.
Coming out.
Yeah, it's coming out that direction. Good. Well, I am always the messiest cook, which is probably, if you've been here before, you know that. So, put those there. The other thing, too, we have in this recipe are our herbs. So, anybody recognize this one? Probably almost need to smell it. And we have this one as well, which I love this one because it looks like a Christmas tree, doesn't it? Oh. Yeah. So this is rosemary, and this is sage. So a lot of the spices you use for Thanksgiving or whatever, but they're very aromatic, and I just love the smell of them. I usually try to buy these if I'm going to use a lot of them, because they will go bad. This is how I keep them in better shape. Again, with the old paper towel, just dampen a paper towel, wrap them up, and either put them back in their case or in a plastic bag, but leave the plastic bag open a little bit so the air can circulate, and they'll last a lot longer. So, yeah, same for the sage. So, and again, these are really easy to grow, so I encourage you, if you have any garden space or community shares, that you can grow that. Okay. So earlier on, I did take some time to chop them up. When I made the soup before, I just chopped with a knife. The rosemary is harder to chop, so there were some pieces that I wasn't crazy about. So this time, I thought I'm gonna just throw it in the food processor, which is what I did. So, wow, but it smells really good. If you want to come up and smell that. Yes, I did chop those up with the food processor, but I suggest that you do your rosemary separately from the sage. Yeah, yeah. So that way you don't have, because when I just chop with a knife, it's really hard to hold on to these little pieces to chop a lot. So some of them escaped my knife, and it's a pretty strong flavor. So, so you can tell that squash is getting a little brown, but you want it to do that because that's going to add flavor to it, all right? So that's a good thing. You can also put this in the oven and roast it. If you've done it before, it's at a higher heat, usually about 475. I will put squash in just on a shallow baking sheet, put a little olive oil on it, salt and pepper, stir it together and stick it in the oven. You've got to stir it a couple of times and it gets cooked really fast. And then a lot of times I'll just eat squash just like this. So it's a great vegetable. It's one of my favorites. I might stick the lid on there for just a little bit right now. Okay. So we've got the garlic, the ginger, and the onion in here. They're all ready to go. I'm gonna clean up this spot. And our herbs, and a little salt and pepper, and vegetable broth, and that's about it. So it doesn't take much. Oh yeah, the Did you say the cutting board or?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, usually I use a little bit thicker one, but yeah, this one works well too. And, you know, again, you're not going to be cutting through something so hard that you're gonna, yeah. Eventually you do have to replace these because you'll get a lot of knife cuts on there. Whenever I'm, again, cutting the squash, I typically just let it stand and then cut down. So, yeah. But again, another reason to have very sharp knives. So too, if you are if you're trying to cut down on calories, the fact that we didn't add cream, which does add fiber, but yeah, that's a little more fat content. Again, we are not using butter. What else? Very little amount of oil. Coconut milk is a great addition to making squash soup. That has a little bit of fat, but that's a healthy fat too, so you just have to weigh that. Yeah. Just a little bit more. When we use this immersion blender, the nice thing about these, you can use it right in the pot. So, anybody familiar with these or use these a lot? Okay, yeah. And this is like a secondhand one, so I've just found it to be like a necessity. It just comes in so handy because you don't have to take stuff out of the pot, throw it in a bowl, and then use it. Just use it right in the pot. Yeah. I have used it for like a tomato soup, if I've roasted real tomatoes, and I've done that. You can use mashed potatoes, whatever. It comes in really handy. Yeah. Okay. Get some of this out of the way here. Oh, I was going to say about the ginger too. I might wrap that up with the same kind of wet towel because it will dry out. And you want to use this stuff within probably pretty much within 2 weeks because once it dries up, you really can't use it that way very easily. You can't make your own vegetable broth, but so I guess going back to our resolutions, if you have a lot of vegetable scraps left over, unless you do, okay? Oh, good, excellent. Unless you have animals to feed, then they would eat all of them, right? But otherwise, yeah, it's good to make your own stock and freeze it, and vegetable stock's great. Oh. So obviously the smaller pieces are getting done faster than the big ones. All right. We'll get there. At this point, I think we're probably far enough along. We're going to add this stuff and kind of get that sauteed a little bit. So you should be smelling all that here pretty soon too. If you have somebody that really is not crazy about onions, but that might be another good reason to put those in the food processor before, so they can't. I like to just have pieces of stuff myself. At this point, I'm going to add just a little bit more pepper there. So I think this calls for like a 3-pound squash, yeah. Which obviously, if this is a very large squash, so you know this would be way too much squash unless you wanted to double the recipe. But not that you should take your scale and weigh them all the time, but probably good to stick kind of to what they ask. Otherwise, you just go ahead and double it. You could freeze this because it doesn't have any dairy product in there, so it would freeze nicely. Yeah.
What's wrong with freezing dairy?
Well, nothing's wrong. You can do that. You can freeze milk, all that, but the quality is a little different when you heat it back up, especially with cream. If
You cook it,
you're
and
right,
then freeze it? Okay.
yeah. So what you could do is just add all the ingredients, and then when you bring it back out from the freezer, let it thaw out, and then add the cream to it and season to taste. Yeah. So that would be a good thing. Well, that piece really didn't cut in half, so that is going to not cook well. Okay. Well, that should be a smell that goes around the library. I got that onions and garlic for sure. And at this point, I'm going to add our seasonings. And I think altogether it called for, let's see, about a tablespoon and a half, which that's pretty close there. So it's going to add some nice color too. If you really liked oregano, you could, in time, I mean, you could really experiment and just throw in the other things too. So, you could. Takes about 8 to 10 minutes to get the squash kind of cooked down a little bit, where it's softer. Okay. Okay. So is there anything that you've seen today that you might want to try? I mean, whether it comes from the fresh herbs or ginger or any of those things? Okay. Yeah. What's that?
I haven't used a lot of ginger before.
Oh, sure, yeah, it'd be great. Ginger is just such a great flavor, and yeah, it really adds a lot to whatever you're making. It's so compatible with squash too. It's a good thing. And you know, you might think it's kind of pricey, but this is a lot of ginger in one small piece. I mean, I've seen pieces this big, so that's if you're really going to use a lot of ginger. But a lot of vitamin C in ginger. Okay, I'm going to do the knife test here, see if we can poke through a lot of these squash pieces, and they're getting close. And this immersion blender will kind of just chew them up a little bit and get them soft. Okay, and the recipe calls for about, I think 3 to 4 cups, which a box is 4 cups. So you will probably use all of it. Somebody's asked me before, what about the cubes, which, I don't know, usually find in chicken and beef cubes. And if that's all you have, you could use that, but I find it just easy to have the liquid. I'm going to try to do a little bit without some liquid, or just very little, and then I'll add more liquid as we go along, because I don't want it to be too liquidy, you know. So you can add up to 4 cups, but maybe we won't need all of that. Just depending on how thick you like your soup. I always like it just a little bit thicker. Exactly, that's true. If you find out you have a lot more people coming than you thought, so then yeah, you could always add some. Yeah. So, okay. And you can use the immersion blender in hot liquids, but It's not always good to have a burner going and then stick it in while the heat's going. I mean, you can do it, but I'm just going to make sure our squash is cooked before then I'll turn off the burner. Another nice thing about these burners, they get really hot, but once you turn them off, that's it. They're done. So I recommend it. If you don't have room for a stove and you need something to cook on, I would recommend one of these for sure. It's an induction burner, and it's kind of similar to what a lot of people have in their homes now. And so, yeah, you just have to watch a little bit more of the temperature because it gets hot really fast. But again, you have to use special cookware too. So, unless cast iron. Cast iron is pretty nice to have anyway. Okay. It's getting pretty brown on the bottom of that too, so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. All right, now I'm going to add just a little bit of my liquid, not all of it to start with, because I want to start smashing all this down. So you basically just stick it in there. And it's all of the blades on the end, that's what ends up smashing the squash. I mean, you can do it by hand too, but I just like doing it. It's more fun. And add more liquid. Like I say, I don't want it to be a puree because if I was going to do that, I would. And the recipe does call for a food processor, but like I say, I like the results from this. Okay, a little more liquid here. And it's nice to see all the color in there with all the green herbs. And the best part is you just serve it right out of the pan, so you don't have to switch to another container. Okay. Now, it's only one thing left to do. Anybody know what that is? Before we get to taste it. That's right. Yeah, and if you trust me, because I would never serve anything to you that I thought, wow, what was I thinking? So, we'll see.
You can always add a little bit more salt later.
You could,
but you
that's
never take
right,
salt back.
which I want to do, is add a little bit more salt.
What kind of salt is that?
This is just like a sea salt,
Okay.
which is typically kind of the kind I use. But there really is a big difference in salt flavors. It is worth your time to get a few samples and taste it.
Is it Morton salt, though? Morton salt?
Morton salt, I would not recommend you use on anything. So yeah, it's very, very salty flavor for sure. And It's just not the best to cook with, for sure. So,
So who makes the other types
Um,
of salt?
well, there's a lot of different makers of salt. I like to use one that's, it is called a kosher salt, but it's a diamond blend or something. It comes in a red box, and they used to have it at Rosar's. I think the Good Food Store has it. But, you know, something that's a smaller grain is good. There's a lot of flake sea salt, which tastes good in a lot of things, but if you want just a basic good old cooking salt, I'd recommend that diamond. Yeah. You can look that up so I know for sure what it is, but let's see. I'm going to just let it heat up just a little bit more so it's all the same temperature, and then we'll be ready to taste it. Clean spoon one more time, see if you have enough salt in there. It's pretty squashy. I think I'm going to finish up with the rest of the, which hopefully is a good thing.
So, do you, so you're not against having salt, right?
Oh, no,
Everybody is, yeah.
if you're on a special low salt diet, then certainly you can use a lot less, or that if you use other spices, it will make you miss the salt a lot more. Citrus is a good thing to use if you're on a low salt diet, but of course that wouldn't taste good in here. But yeah. And that garlic is pretty strong in there. Sometimes you'll get stronger garlic than what you thought there would be. But this is not a sweet flavored soup like a lot of the soups are. The squash itself will be sweet, but I think we're so used to tasting things that have more of a, I don't know, whether it's a little bit of added sugar or honey, whatever, that we forget what just, you know, the real basic ingredients taste like. Okay, I'm going to heat this up a little bit and then we'll be ready. I've got a few toasted pumpkin seeds to put on the top. Oh, some spoons and some bowls here.
Yeah, we're inside of an hour.
What's that?
We're inside of
Yes, we are
an
again.
hour.
Well, I'm
Actually
always,
only about 50 minutes because we started late.
yeah, that's true. I always like to be aware of your time because I appreciate you coming out to, whoops, should not talk and try to work at the same time. Yeah, you know, everybody's got a lot of things to do, so I try to keep it under an hour.
Does this food come from any certain ethnic area or anything like that?
No, I don't believe so. I just think, yeah, because I think certainly the butternut squash was probably pretty Americanized, and yeah. So, I mean, you can add whatever spices you want. Again, curry is very good in there. You could do the same recipe, but use curry instead of the herbs we used. So, but I just put a little bit of the curry powder when you're sauteing the onions and the garlic, so it brings out that flavor. But at this point, we could even, if you wanted to, you know, on your own, you could add a little bit of coconut milk to it, or a little bit of cream to kind of change the flavor a little bit. So,
Is the squash going to be self-thickening?
it does thicken it up quite a bit, yeah, as you'll notice here, because we did have a lot of squash. And we didn't, I mean, we used a whole container here. If you felt like you still wanted it to be thinner, then you could add a little bit more stock. But, yeah, it definitely is pretty thick. Okay. As soon as that gets warmed up, we'll let everybody have a taste. Any other questions or?
Are you gonna be doing more classes at the senior center?
Yes, next month. Yeah. The Thursday, I believe it's is it the 15th, 16th? Yeah, yeah, so I'll be there.
I always miss those.
Yeah.
So I'd like to have that
Sure.
registered.
Well, I try to do different things for every class, so that way you don't, yeah, feel like you're getting a repeat on anything. Oh. Okay, now it's starting to bubble up a little bit. And as always, too, some people like a little more pepper or salt than others, so that will be up to your taste. So I'll just set these out and everybody can come up and take a taste. I can say again, if this is not Panera squash soup, if anybody's tasted theirs, which is very good, but it's very sweet. Panera, yeah, the restaurant that's where everybody goes to have their squash soup. Yeah.
A lot of fun recipes.
They do
try
a
to
very
be,
nice
you know,
job. Yeah.
Anti-McDonald's. They really do.
Exactly,
They
and
really-
it's fresh, yeah. So, and like I said,
Sandwich and soup and bakery.
yeah, just out by Target. So, but they do, and there's a nice copycat recipe is what they're called online, so you can try that too. That's I encourage you to try lots of different varieties, so you can pick your favorites. Because the thing we want you to do is to try some squash, but what you mix with it is up to you. So, this one might not be as much to your liking, but maybe it will be. Oh. Okay. All right, so would you like to come up and grab one or take one with you or whatever you would like. Oh, thank you. Thank you for your patience.